John Perkins calls himself a former economic hitman. He has seen the signs of today's financial meltdown before. The subprime mortgage fiasco, the collapse of the banking industry, the rising unemployment rate, these are all familiar to him. Perkins was on the front lines of monitoring and helping create these very events that were once just confined to the third world. From 71 to 1981, he worked for the international consulting firm Chas T. Main, where he was a self-described economic hitman. It was based in Boston. He's the author of the New York Times bestseller Confessions of an Economic Hitman and The Secret History of the American Empire. Well, he's out with a new book. It's called Hoodwinked. An Economic Hitman reveals why the world financial markets implode and what we need to do to remake them. He joins me here in the Firehouse studio. Welcome, John. Well, for starters, though we've discussed this before, what exactly does an economic hitman mean?
Well, Amy, I think it's fair to say that we economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Allow us to build a military base in your backyard. Something along these lines. And when we fail, as I talk in my books, I failed with Jaime Roldos, president of Ecuador, Omar Torrijos of Panama. The jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. And
what personal experience do you have to prove this?
Well, I was there. I was with Jaime Roldos in Ecuador. I was the guy, one of the guys who was supposed to corrupt him, bring him around, and Omar Torrijos of Panama, and many others. When I failed with those two gentlemen, the jackals went in and assassinated both of them. And I was in those front lines. My official title was chief economist of Charles T. Main. I had about 36 employees working for me, and did this for 10 years, and finally saw the light. But I think what's really important about all this is that in this period of time, since the 1970s and really beginning very strongly in the 1980s, we've created what I consider a mutant viral form of capitalism. You earlier in the program, you show the statistics of 37% of the people in the survey not believing that capitalism's working. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we've developed in the last 30 or 40 years, particularly beginning with the time of Reagan and Milton Friedman's economic theories, which stress that the only goal of business is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs, and not to regulate businesses at all. Regulation's bad of all forms, and to privatize everything so that everything's run by private business. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world.
You talk about the robber barons, the modern-day robber barons. Who do you mean?
So many of them. You know, we've seen them recently on Wall Street, the people from Goldman Sachs and Citigroup and so many other organizations. People like Jack Welch, who is a former CEO of General Electric. And as I lecture at business schools and MBA programs, Jack Welch is often held up as this idol. Jack Welch laid off a quarter of GE's employees. You know, he said he was making the company meaner and leaner. He certainly was making it meaner. Gave himself huge raises and bonuses at the same time. Turned General Electric essentially from a manufacturing company into a financial services company, which really was one of the leaders in taking us down this course today that we're on of a failed economic system. And we truly have a failed economic system at this point. It's deep. You know, one of the reasons I wrote Hoodwinked is because I saw a lot of books coming out that deal with what I consider triage. What do you do with AIG? What do you do with General Electric? What do you do about the immediate problems with Wall Street? But the problem is much, much deeper. There's a cancer beneath all that. And this is this very basics of our current economic system. And we must delve down and root out that cancer and move into something much better. I have a 2-year-old grandson. And as I look at this baby, you know, I think, what's this world going to look like in 6 decades when he's my age? If we stay the course, it'll be horrible. But we have this opportunity now, and I think this economic turmoil that we're in today is teaching us that we must change. We have a failed system. We must create something better. And we must realize that my grandson can't possibly hope to inherit a sustainable, just, and peaceful world unless every child growing up in Ethiopia and in Bolivia and in Indonesia and in Israel and Palestine has that same expectation. For the first time in history, we're really living on a very, very tiny, highly integrated planet, and we're all communicating with each other. Everybody's listening to Democracy Now! All around the world. We're all talking on the cell phone and by internet. We really get it. We're a very, very small community, and we need to recognize that.
John Perkins, you have an interesting theory about what happened in Honduras, the coup that just took place there. What do you think?
Well, I don't think it's a theory. I think it's. I was in Panama at the time that the coup took place, and the democratically elected president Zelaya had called for a new constitution to replace the old one that was really set up by the oligarchy in favor of the very, very, very wealthy and the international companies. He also called for a 60% increase in the bottom wage rate, which had a huge impact on Dole and Chiquita, two of the biggest employers in that company. They, along with a number of companies that have sweatshops in Honduras, strongly objected, very much the same way that they had objected to Aristide in Haiti when he did something similar, and called in the military. The general in charge of the military was a graduate of our School of the Americas, this school that's famous for creating dictators, and they overthrew Zelaya. It was a classic CIA-sponsored type of coup, very similar to what United Fruit had done in Guatemala in the early 50s, and of course United Fruit became Chiquita. So you had this, this strong relationship, and got rid of this democratically elected president because he was drawing a line in the sand. We'd seen 10 countries in Latin America bring in new presidents who were instituting very significant reforms in favor of the people, in favor of using local resources to help the people pull themselves up by the bootstraps, and I think the corporatocracy decided to draw a line in the sand in Honduras.